All right, we are back with another team preview. This time the Miami Dolphins are on the clock. We're going over all 32 teams, talking every fantasy relevant player from those teams. If it's your first time here, don't make it the last. Sub to the Justin Henry Show right down below here. And hit the like button for me right here on this side. All right, so we're going to go over all the fantasy relevant players for the Miami Dolphins today, who are a very fun fantasy team. And towards the end of the season, actually somewhat became not reliable, right? Had some really high outputs at the beginning of the year, and then towards the end of the season, fell off slightly. So I'm going to talk about every player and what I think it means for fantasy coming up this season, okay? Obviously, the first place to start is with the quarterback position, Tua Tagovailoa. And last year, you were getting Tua at high-end QB2 prices. I was one of the players or one of the people that talked about potentially him being a top 5 to 10 quarterback. And sure as shit, he was a QB9 finish. And a lot of what he did was in the beginning of the season. He had some really strong outputs at the beginning of the year. He ended up throwing for 4,624 yards, led the NFL in passing, 29 TDs, 14 interceptions. So a very strong season from Tua, but fell off in the second half in a major way. He had no games over 20 fantasy points after week 8. And before that, in the first 8 weeks, he had 4 games over 20 points. So, with Tua, we kind of know like this is going to be an explosive player at times. He's going to have some major games, especially when the weather is good in Miami, it's hot out there. But when those winter months come, it's like he kind of slowed down a little bit. And this ground game became a lot more prevalent under Mike McDaniel, who's known to just, use his talent to win. And they have some really good running backs in Miami. So I think Tua is still going to be a very good fantasy quarterback, probably go in the high-end QB2 conversation. And I think that's about right. You know what to expect output-wise. I'd be concerned if obviously once we take a deeper dive into the schedule and we look at fantasy playoff schedule, be able to see, where do the Dolphins play, because that will matter when it comes to this Dolphins team. If they're playing in the snow or in the cold, that timing system that they like to use in Miami might be to your detriment. It might, just being honest. So we have to take that in consideration when it comes to drafting these guys. Obviously, I'm not going to pass on them just because of that. But it will be something to note. Tua should still be a very similar quarterback to what he was last season. The running game will be very interesting this year. RAHEEM Mostert, DEVON Achane. RAHEEM Mostert finishes the RB5 last year. Incredible season for him. Led the league in rushing touchdowns, 1,012 yards in 15 games, 18 rushing touchdowns, almost cracked 20 rushing touchdowns. He had 21 total with 3 receiving TDs. He only had 2 games all season last year without double-digit fantasy points. 2. And he only had 3 games all last season, only 3 without a touchdown. Only 3. So he's getting used in the red zone. They use him in the passing game. They use him in the running game. RAHEEM Mostert, I'm sure at some point this thing is going to switch to a DEVON Achane-led backfield, but RAHEEM Mostert's a little bit bigger. And this team, for durability purposes, they're going to need RAHEEM Mostert to be elite still. The good thing is, he was injured a lot his time with San Francisco. He doesn't have a lot of tread on the tires. So even though he's an older running back, 31 years old, he still has room, like room to run. Obviously coming off a very strong season, 1,000-yard year. We talked about the touchdowns. It's like there's still tread on the tires. So while he might not be as explosive as he once was, he's still one of the fastest players in the NFL. You can use RAHEEM Mostert, and he's still being punished in drafts because everybody's expecting DEVON Achane to take over as the lead back. So if I could get RAHEEM Mostert in the RB3 category, I think that's a win for fantasy teams, especially, once the season gets going, if he stays healthy. Mostert's proved in back-to-back years that he's going to be relevant in this offense. So I like RAHEEM Mostert as a value pick, even with Achane there. I think RAHEEM Mostert in RB3 land is probably going to be a steal this year. I'm not going to lie, especially for those 0 RB guys, the ones that wait on RB, it's going to be a value. And then on the other side, DEVON Achane, who finishes the RB24. On a per-game basis, he was much better than that. But he had a 51-point game in his second start of the season. A 51-point game. I actually wasn't even starting at that point. This was a backup game. He was still a backup at the time. And this was the game where they ran through the Broncos. 200 yards, 4 touchdowns in that game in week 3. And then he had 3 straight games of 20 points before getting injured. And we talked about the size and, the durability aspect of Achane, which is what we're going to have to watch out for. He got hurt in week 5. And then after he came back, he was a lot more inconsistent. This is probably more indicative of the player that we're going to get as opposed to like railing off 20-point performance after 20-point performance. It was so crazy to see during the time because we're like, is this the standard for Achane, who is so explosive and able to hit home runs? It looked like he was going to be like a league winner at points in the season. But after the injury, he came back. Like I said, he was a little bit more inconsistent. He ended up finishing with 800 yards rushing, 8 rushing touchdowns, and 3 receiving TDs. I didn't see anywhere near that amount of touchdowns coming from Achane, who is on the smaller side. But the speed kills, and especially in that Dolphins offense, he's going to have loads of opportunity. If I was looking at De'Von Achane, I'd be very careful about reaching for him early based off of the expectations that were set when he first came into the league. I think he's going to burn a lot of people this year because we have to draft De'Von Achane for the upside. You're drafting De'Von Achane for the weekly 50-point upside that he carries or 20-point upside that he carries on a weekly basis because of his home run threat ability, because of the speed of this Dolphins offense, because you got to account for so many things when it comes to what Mike McDaniel likes to do on the football field. So I think with Achane, be very careful. If this is going to be a player that you target, just know you need to get some safe players around him because while he has the upside, there's going to be weeks where if he doesn't score a touchdown or he's not, popping off for a 50-yard gain, that it's going to, he's probably not going to be as valuable as you think he is. So be careful with De'Von Achane. I see the upside. I recognize the upside. And on a weekly basis, if he had a 40-point game, I don't think it's going to shock anybody. Just exercise a little bit of caution when it comes to De'Von Achane when you're drafting. Don't reach for him thinking he's going to be a top 5 lock. If he played all games and he stays healthy, just be careful with that, all right? It's more about role than it even is with injury when it comes to Achane. And as far as receivers go, Tyreek Hill finishes the wide receiver 2 last year. Tyreek Hill is probably the safest receiver to take out of any receiver in the league right now. He stays healthy. He's durable. He's been a top 2 receiver 3 of the last 4 seasons. It doesn't matter if it's been with the Chiefs or with the Dolphins. And the only other season, he was 6th. So he's been durable. He's been consistent. And I mean, why wouldn't we continue to believe in Tyreek Hill, who, really wants to challenge for that 2,000-yard marker? I don't think that stops this year. I think he's still trying to challenge for 2,000 yards. Last season, he had 119 catches, almost 1,800 yards, 1,799. And that was a career high for him, yardage-wise. And he also had 13 touchdowns. So he's being utilized in the passing game as the main weapon. But it's like, when it came to Tua last year, Tua's performance started to drop off towards that second half, and it kind of affected Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill also played through an injury towards the second half of last season, right around the fantasy playoffs, and that caused a little bit of his, he was a little inconsistent more down the stretch than we were accustomed to. As long as Tyreek Hill stays healthy, he's going to be a top 3 wide receiver in fantasy. No question at all, especially with the way this offense moves and utilizes him. It's just a matter of what does the schedule look like for this Dolphins team who plays really well when it's not windy, really well when the conditions and the elements aren't there. And can Tyreek Hill stay healthy the whole season, not have an ankle or hamstring? A lot of times those hamstrings are bothering him. Let's just see Tyreek Hill healthy for an entire season. I like Tyreek Hill, and I think he's probably the safest player to take at the top 3 when it comes to receiver. If you want to take Jettas, you want to take CeeDee Lamb, you want to take Christian McCaffrey at the number 1 spot, I don't really have an issue taking any of those guys there. But Tyreek Hill, if you're just looking for absolute safe, I know he's going to produce. He's been a top 2 receiver in PPR leagues over the left. Just you know what it is when it comes to Tyreek Hill. You know what to expect. I'll say that. Even though he's older, 30 years old, 31 years old, you still know what to expect. What you don't know what to expect out of is what are we going to get out of Jaylen Waddle? Jaylen Waddle was a player, obviously taken in the first round, has very similar type speed to what Tyreek Hill has. It was an up and down season for him last year. And there was a lot of people, including myself, who were putting Jaylen Waddle in the top 15 category. And it was, it's hard to have 2 receivers in the top 15 without your quarterback being top 5 quarterback into it. And so that was, I mean, we kind of saw that last year. He played in 14 games this season, this last season. He finished as a wide receiver 34. So he was on a per game basis, he wasn't even that great. But the 2 years before that, he finished as the wide receiver 13 with Tyreek Hill. And the year before that, he finished as a wide receiver 8 as in his rookie year. I had that backwards. 13 and 8. Obviously, he could be a slight value this year. 72 catches, 114 yards, 4 touchdowns. We're going to get Jaylen Waddle in wide receiver 3 category, and there's probably going to be people who pass on him because of his play from last season. Mind you, Jaylen Waddle was dealing with injuries at times last year as well, and this offense started humming in different ways when the run game got going with Mostert and DEVON Achane. So Jaylen Waddle's role did become a little bit more inconsistent last year, but he still finished with 1,000 yards. He still has 70 catches. The touchdowns, if he would have had 4 or 5 more touchdowns, we might have been talking about a different year. If he would have played in all 17 games as opposed to 14, we might have been talking about a 1,300-yard season. So I know Jaylen Waddle's a tough player because Tyreek Hill dominates this receiving core, but it wouldn't surprise me to see Jaylen Waddle actually do really well this season and enter a wide receiver 2 value range yet again. So if we can get a discount on Jaylen Waddle this year, I'm here for it. I'm all for discounted Jaylen Waddle. And I think, he kind of goes in with some of those players. Like if I'm looking for a receiver in those middle rounds, I think I could get him in the 6th, 7th round and feel very, very good about my receiving core, especially, if anything does happen to Tyreek Hill, we've seen Jaylen Waddle step up in those times as well. So love what Jaylen Waddle brings. I think he's more of a value this year than he's ever been. And then in the offseason, team signed Odell Beckham as well, who didn't play well with the Ravens, had some injuries, was very inconsistent with the Ravens. He'll be in a much better offense, right, for fantasy purposes, and he has a chance to be relevant. Like if one of the other receivers goes down, Waddle or Tyreek, he'll have a chance to be relevant on a weekly basis. So we've seen other receivers, Chosen Anderson, come in this offense, play really well. I think Odell Beckham will have spot starts at times or spot moments when he does look good. So I've always been, Odell Beckham played so well early in his career that he has that name value. We give him a little bit more of a pass than we give other players. I don't think he's a terrible player. He had 565 yards last year, 3 TDs in 14 games. I think if you can take down the guard of Odell Beckham's not who he used to be, 1,000-yard receiver, 10 touchdowns. If you can take that down a notch, I think you can find flex value during bye weeks with Odell Beckham. You can. Am I going to draft Odell Beckham? Probably not on a lot of teams because he doesn't carry weekly upside. So will this be a player when injuries happen as the season goes on that I'm paying very close attention to? Yes. And if we see the receptions early on in this offense with Odell Beckham, he's going to be snagged off of waivers very early this season. So be careful. Just be cautious watching with Odell Beckham. I don't think it would draft him, but I think early on, if we're seeing, 8 targets, 6 targets in any of the early games, I think he's going to be a player we might be drafting. So he carries the same risk as a lot of these Dolphins players, schedule dependent because of the timing routes later in the year. But I like Odell Beckham as an early season waiver wire watch. And then at tight end, I won't spend too much time on it. JONNU Smith, this offense doesn't really use the tight end. He came over from Atlanta in the offseason. He had a career season in Atlanta, 50 catches, 582 yards. And he finishes the tight end 17. So there might be some people thinking, hey, this offense is going to need him. But we saw the exact same thing with Mike Gesicki in this offense. They don't really use their tight end. So while I think he brings a little bit more name value, JONNU Smith, we've seen him play well with the Titans before in the past. He played, decent with Atlanta last year. I just don't really expect much out of JONNU Smith, upside wise or anything. So back end, tight end 2, high end, tight end 3 at best, even in this offense. All right. Hopefully that clear up a lot of players on the Dolphins. If there's any players you want to hear about, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, see you on the next one. Peace out.